The Valkyrie Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They had conquered over 10,000 worlds and brought them all under their control. Their ships traveled faster than light, crossing vast distances in mere days. Their weapons could destroy entire cities in seconds. No species had ever successfully resisted them. The Empire believed this pattern would continue forever. Commander Guan stood on the bridge of his scout vessel, watching the third planet of an unremarkable star system grow larger on his screens. The planet was mostly blue and green, covered with water and forests. His sensors detected billions of life forms on the surface. Intelligence reports indicated that these creatures, who called themselves humans, had only recently achieved basic spaceflight. They had primitive rockets that used chemical fuel. Their largest vessels were small stations orbiting their homeworld. Guan had performed this duty dozens of times before. He would arrive at a primitive world, demonstrate the Empire's superior power, and offer them a choice. Join the Empire peacefully and become a vassal state, or resist and be destroyed. Most species chose survival. The few that resisted learned quickly that defiance was futile. This visit should be no different. His tactical officer Minho approached with a datapad. The young officer had recently graduated from the Imperial Academy with high honors. This was his first deployment to an uncontacted world. Minho reported that their scans showed human technology was even more primitive than expected. Their ships used nuclear fusion for power. They had no energy shields. Their weapons were mostly kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. A single Valkyrie cruiser could defeat their entire military force. Guan nodded and ordered his fleet to enter a high orbit. Above the human homeworld, he commanded 12 war cruisers, each capable of devastating a continent. The formation was designed to be visible from the planet's surface. It was psychological warfare. Let the primitives see what power looked like. Let them understand how small and vulnerable they were. Fear made negotiations much simpler. Within an hour, the humans responded to his communication signal. A woman appeared on his viewing screen. She wore a dark blue uniform with golden insignia on her shoulders. Her expression was calm and professional. She introduced herself as Admiral Hai-Jin of the United Earth Defense Force. Guan was surprised by her composure. Most primitive species showed immediate fear or panic when faced with imperial power. This human showed neither. Guan delivered the standard message. He explained that the Valkyrie Empire now claimed dominion over this star system. All human military forces would be dissolved. All human governments would report to an imperial governor. All human resources would be managed for the benefit of the Empire. Resistance would be met with overwhelming force. He offered them 72 hours to accept these terms. His tone was formal but firm. He had given this speech many times before. Admiral Hai-Jin listened without interruption. When Guan finished, she thanked him politely for his message. She said that humanity would need time to discuss such an important decision. She promised a response before the deadline. Then she ended the transmission. Guan found her reaction unusual but not concerning. Some species tried to negotiate for better terms. It never worked. The Empire's position was non-negotiable. During the waiting period, Minho conducted detailed scans of human space assets. The results confirmed their initial assessment. Earth had several hundred satellites in orbit. They had established small research stations on their moon. They were building basic mining outposts in their asteroid belt. Their largest warship measured 800 meters in length. It was armed with nuclear missiles and mass driver weapons. Impressive for a primitive species, but completely inadequate against Valkyrie. The technology. Minho also detected something unusual in the outer regions of the human star system. There were massive energy signatures near the orbit of their 8th planet. The sensors indicated enormous structures, but they were too far away for detailed scans. Minho suggested sending a probe to investigate. Guan dismissed the concern. Whatever the humans were building out there was irrelevant. They could not threaten an imperial fleet with primitive technology, regardless of size. The hours passed slowly. Guan reviewed intelligence reports about human culture and history. The species was young and aggressive. They had only recently unified their world under a single governing body. Before that, they had been divided into hundreds of competing nations. They had fought countless wars among themselves. Their history was soaked in blood and conflict. Yet somehow, they had survived and reached for the stars. One detail caught Giwan's attention. Humans had a concept they called stubbornness. It meant refusing to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. Their historical records showed numerous examples of small human forces fighting much larger enemies. Sometimes they won through clever tactics. More often, they lost but inflicted heavy casualties. The report suggested that humans did not surrender easily. Giwan noted this trait, but did not consider it a serious concern. Stubbornness meant nothing against superior firepower. As the deadline approached, Giwan ordered his fleet to charge their weapons. If the humans refused to submit, he would demonstrate what imperial power meant. He would target their largest cities and destroy them one by one until they begged for mercy. It was brutal, but effective. The empire had maintained peace for 3,000 years through strength and fear. Giwan was simply another instrument of that policy. Admiral Hyjin appeared on his screen exactly at the deadline. Her expression remained calm. She spoke clearly and politely. She thanked Giwan for his patience. She explained that humanity had carefully considered the Empire's offer. After much discussion, they had reached a unanimous decision. Earth would not become a vassal state. Humanity preferred to remain independent. She hoped the Empire would respect their choice and depart peacefully. Guan stared at the screen in disbelief. In his entire career, he had never heard a primitive species refuse the Empire's offer. It was suicide. These humans clearly did not understand what they were facing. He felt a mixture of anger and pity. He activated his weapons targeting systems. If they chose death over submission, he would grant their wish. The conquest of Earth would be remembered as a warning to other foolish species. Giwan's fingers moved toward the firing controls. His bridge crew watched in tense silence. They all knew what came next. The Empire would make an example of Earth. Other primitive species would hear about what happened to those who defied imperial authority. It was a lesson written in fire and death across the galaxy for thousands of years. Before he could give the order to fire, his sensor operator Dayon shouted from her station. Her voice was high and urgent. She reported multiple massive contacts appearing at the edge of the solar system. The sensors showed 12 enormous objects accelerating inward at incredible speeds. The computers struggled to calculate their mass and velocity. The numbers kept changing as the system tried to make sense of what it was detecting. Giwan demanded clarification. Were these human warships? Dayon shook her head rapidly. The objects were far too large to be warships. The smallest one measured over 15 kilometers in length. The largest was showing as 47 kilometers long and 12 kilometers wide. No species built warships that size. It was inefficient and wasteful. Even Imperial dreadnoughts were only 3 kilometers long. These objects had to be space stations or construction platforms. Minna quickly ran tactical analysis. If these were stations, they should be stationary or moving slowly. Instead, they were accelerating at rates that should be impossible for structures that massive. The largest one was generating thrust equivalent to a small star. The energy readings were enormous. Whatever engines the humans had installed on these structures, they were far more powerful than anything seen on human vessels near Earth. Admiral Hyjin's face appeared on the communication screen again. She wore the same calm expression as before. She apologized for any confusion. She explained that the approaching objects were not military vessels. They were generation ships and habitat colonies. Humanity had been building them for decades in the outer solar system. They were designed for long voyages to other star systems. Without faster-than-light travel, humans needed ships large enough to support populations for centuries. She continued speaking in her polite, measured tone. The largest structure was called Haven 3. It was a rotating cylinder habitat that housed 2 million people. The rotation provided artificial gravity for the inhabitants. The walls were meters thick, designed to protect against radiation and micrometeorite impacts. It had farms, forests, cities, and factories inside. It was a complete human civilization in space. Giwan listened with growing unease. He asked why these civilian structures were approaching his fleet. Admiral Hyjin explained calmly that if the Empire insisted on attacking Earth, humanity would defend itself with every available resource. The generation ships were not designed as weapons, but they could be used as such if necessary. Each one carried experimental weapon systems that Earth had been developing. They also carried millions of civilians who were willing to die, protecting their homeworld. Minho's tactical computer began running combat simulations. The results made Jiwan's blood run cold. The generation ships were built to withstand the harsh environment of deep space for hundreds of years. Their hulls were designed to survive impacts from asteroids and extreme temperature changes. Imperial plasma cannons would barely damage their outer armor. It would take sustained bombardment to destroy even one of them. Meanwhile, the weapons these structures carried were primitive but devastating at this scale. Haven 3 alone had been equipped with dozens of relativistic kinetic impactors. These were simple mass drivers that could accelerate chunks of metal to a significant fraction of light speed. At those velocities, even a small projectile carried enough energy to vaporize an Imperial cruiser. The generation ship could fire dozens of these weapons simultaneously. Daeon reported that the human structures were forming a defensive perimeter around Earth. They were positioning themselves between the Imperial fleet and the human homeworld. Each structure was spacing itself to provide overlapping fields of fire. Despite being civilian vessels, they were moving with military precision. Someone had trained these crews in defensive tactics. Giwan tried to maintain his composure. He told Admiral Hyjin that her structures would not save Earth. The Empire had the firepower to destroy them all. It would simply take more time and ammunition than he had initially planned. He still had 12 war cruisers. Each one carried enough weapons to devastate a planet. These civilian structures stood no chance. Admiral Hyjin tilted her head slightly. She acknowledged that the Empire could probably destroy the generation ships eventually. However, she pointed out that it would require Guwan's entire fleet to focus fire on one structure at a time. While his ships were engaged with one target, the others would be free to return fire. Her tactical analysis suggested that the Empire would lose at least half its ships, destroying the human structures. Was Jiwan willing to accept those casualties for the conquest of one primitive world? The question hung in the air. Guwan had never lost a ship in combat. His record was perfect. The Empire did not tolerate commanders who suffered heavy losses, even in victory. If he attacked now and lost 6 cruisers, his career would be over. He might even face execution for incompetence. But if he retreated without fighting, he would be branded a coward. The Empire also did not tolerate commanders who fled from primitive species. Minho quietly suggested a tactical withdrawal to reassess the situation. They could retreat beyond the range of human weapons and contact Imperial headquarters for reinforcements. With a larger fleet, they could overwhelm the human defenses without suffering unacceptable losses. It was a reasonable suggestion. Jiwan hated it because it meant admitting he had underestimated the enemy. Jiwan made his decision. He ordered his fleet to withdraw to the outer edge of the solar system. He told Admiral Hyjin that the Empire would return with greater force. This delay was not mercy, but merely a postponement of Earth's inevitable subjugation. She thanked him for his consideration and ended the transmission. Her expression never changed. She had successfully called his bluff. As his fleet retreated, Jiwan composed an emergency report to Imperial headquarters. He described the human defenses and requested immediate reinforcement. He emphasized the unusual nature of human space architecture. He warned that standard conquest doctrine would not work against a species that built structures at this scale. He knew his superiors would not believe him at first. The report would seem like the excuses of a failed commander. But eventually, they would see the truth. Earth was unlike any primitive world the Empire had encountered before. Grand Admiral Sun Wu received Jiwan's report with skepticism. She had commanded Imperial fleets for 40 years. She had personally overseen the conquest of 73 worlds. Never in her career had a primitive species successfully resisted first contact. Jiwan's report seemed impossible. Civilian structures large enough to threaten war cruisers. It defied everything the Empire knew about technological development. She reviewed the sensor data that Jiwan had transmitted. The numbers were accurate. The energy signatures were real. The structures existed exactly as described. Sunwoo had to accept the evidence before her eyes. These humans had built something the Empire had not anticipated. She immediately began assembling a punitive fleet. If one squadron could not conquer Earth, then overwhelming force would dot. Within 2 weeks, Sunwoo gathered 60 capital ships from nearby sectors. It was the largest fleet deployment in 2 centuries. The last time the Empire had assembled this much firepower was to crush a rebellion of 5 star systems. For a single, primitive world, it seemed excessive. But Sunwoo refused to underestimate an enemy. That was how commanders lost battles and empires fell. The fleet arrived in the human solar system with weapons charged and shields active. Sunwoo expected to see a dozen primitive structures defending Earth. Instead, her sensors detected 17 massive objects arranged in defensive formations. The humans had moved additional generation ships and habitats from throughout their system. They had concentrated everything they had to protect their homeworld. A communication request came from Earth. Sunwoo accepted it. A middle-aged human man appeared on her screen. He wore simple civilian clothing and spoke with a calm, measured voice. He introduced himself as Taijin, humanity's chief diplomatic representative. He welcomed the Imperial fleet to the solar system. He expressed hope that this meeting would lead to peaceful relations between their peoples. Sunwoo was not interested in peace. She informed Taijin that humanity's resistance had been noted and would be punished. The Empire would demonstrate what happened to species who defied imperial authority. She gave him 1 hour to evacuate civilians from military targets. After that, her fleet would begin bombardment operations. She ended the transmission without waiting for his response. Taijin sent another message within minutes. He thanked Sunwoo for her warning. However, he explained that there were no purely military targets in the human defensive network. Every structure contained civilians. The generation ships housed families. The habitats sheltered children. The mining stations employed workers who had built homes in space. If the Empire attacked any target, it would be killing civilians. He hoped the Empire would reconsider its course of action. Sunwoo dismissed his concerns. War always involves civilian casualties. The Empire's policy was clear. Resistance meant destruction. She selected a mining colony on Ganymede as her first target. The moon orbited the largest gas giant in the human system. The colony there housed approximately 50,000 humans. It was significant enough to demonstrate imperial power, but far enough from Earth that the humans might not retaliate immediately. She ordered 3 cruisers to bombard the colony. Plasma bolts rained down on the moon's surface. The mining installations shattered under the assault. Atmosphere vented into space. Buildings collapsed. Fires erupted in the underground tunnels. Within 10 minutes, the colony was destroyed. Sunwoo watched the destruction with satisfaction. Now the humans would understand what resistance cost. The response came faster than she expected. 3 generation ships immediately changed course. They began accelerating directly toward her fleet formation. These were not small vessels launching from a defensive position. These were massive structures, each carrying tens of thousands of civilians, turning themselves into projectiles. The ships were accelerating hard, burning their fusion engines at maximum thrust. Sunwoo's tactical officer shouted warnings. If those ships continued their current course and speed, they would collide with the Imperial fleet in less than 2 hours. Each generation ship massed billions of tons. At their current velocity, even one impact would destroy multiple cruisers. The shields could not stop objects that massive. Sunwoo would have to destroy the generation ships or move her fleet out of their path. She ordered her weapons. Officers to target the approaching structures. Plasma cannons fired. Missiles launched. The weapons struck the generation ships' hulls. The impacts created bright flashes and scattered debris. But the structures kept coming. Their armor was too thick. Their momentum was too great. Conventional weapons were not enough to stop them in time. Sunwoo faced an impossible choice. She could hold her formation and destroy the generation ships, but the debris alone might damage her vessels. or she could scatter her fleet to avoid collision, which would break her tactical formation and expose her ships to attack from other human vessels. She chose survival. She ordered her fleet to disperse immediately. The Imperial ships broke formation, each vessel moving to avoid the oncoming generation ships. As they scattered, human destroyer squadrons that had been hiding behind the larger structures launched their attack. They were small, fast ships armed with missiles and kinetic weapons. They targeted the communication relays and sensor arrays on the Imperial cruisers. The attacks were precise and coordinated. Within minutes, half of Sun Wu's fleet had lost their long-range sensors. Several ships reported damage to their communication systems. The fleet's coordination collapsed. Individual captains were making decisions without central command. The humans had turned a show of force into chaos. Sun Wu struggled to regain control of her scattered vessels. The 3-generation ships finally slowed their approach. They had never intended to actually collide with the Imperial fleet. It had been a bluff, a demonstration of human willingness to sacrifice everything to defend their home. Admiral Hygiene sent a message to Sun Wu. She apologized for the aggressive maneuver. She explained that humanity had no experience with galactic warfare doctrine. They were improvising their defense with whatever tactics seemed effective. Sun Wu ordered her fleet to regroup at a safe distance. She had come here expecting a quick victory. Instead, she found herself fighting an enemy that did not follow any predictable pattern. The humans used civilian vessels as weapons. They sacrificed tactical advantages for psychological impact. They targeted communication and sensors, rather than attempting to destroy ships. Nothing about their tactics made sense according to Imperial military doctrine. As her fleet reformed, Sun Wu realized something disturbing. She had brought 60 capital ships to conquer one primitive world. She had destroyed a single mining colony. In response, the humans had damaged her fleet's coordination and forced her into a defensive position. If this continued, she might actually lose this battle. The thought was almost unthinkable. The Empire had not lost a major engagement in over 500 years. She opened a secure channel to Imperial headquarters. She needed to speak with Emperor Changmin directly. This situation had escalated beyond a simple conquest operation. Humanity was not just another primitive species. They were something different, something dangerous. The Empire needed to understand what they were facing before committing more resources. Sun Wu feared that brute force alone might not be enough to defeat these strange, stubborn humans. Emperor Changmin convened an emergency session of the Imperial War Council. The ornate chamber filled with military commanders, intelligence officers, and political advisors. They gathered to discuss a problem that should not exist. A primitive species had successfully resisted imperial conquest not once, but twice. The situation was unprecedented in 3,000 years of empire. Shan listened as intelligence analysts presented their findings. The humans had achieved something remarkable through necessity rather than genius. Without faster-than-light travel, they needed generation ships for interstellar colonization. These ships had to be enormous to support populations for centuries. Without anti-gravity technology, they built rotating habitats for artificial gravity. Without energy shields, they designed armor thick enough to withstand cosmic radiation and asteroid impacts. The analysts explained that the Empire had evolved differently. After discovering faster-than-light travel early in their development, the Valkyrie had focused on efficiency. Their ships were sleek and powerful, but relatively small. A typical dreadnought measured 3 kilometers and carried 800 crew. They could cross the galaxy in weeks. They could destroy cities in seconds. But they were not built to fight opponents who thought at massive scales. One intelligence officer displayed comparison charts on the holographic projector. A human generation ship had a hull volume over 1,000 times larger than an Imperial cruiser. The armor was designed to protect against cosmic radiation for centuries, making it nearly impervious to conventional plasma weapons. The life support systems could sustain millions of people indefinitely. These structures were not warships, but they made formidable defensive platforms by accident. War Minister Borum stood to address the council. She was a hardliner who believed in imperial supremacy above all else. She argued that the Empire could not show weakness. If humanity was allowed to resist successfully, other vassal species might rebel. The Empire must commit whatever resources necessary to conquer Earth. She proposed deploying planet-killer dreadnoughts to destroy the human homeworld entirely. It would send a clear message across the galaxy. Ambassador Giwan had been listening quietly from her seat. She was humanity's representative to the imperial court, having arrived just days before on a small diplomatic vessel. She asked permission to speak. Emperor Chungman nodded. He was curious to hear what the human had to say. Guan rose gracefully and approached the center of the chamber. She spoke in perfect Valkyrie, her accent betraying only slight traces of her origin. She thanked the council for their time and attention. She understood their concern. Humanity's resistance appeared to threaten imperial stability. However, she suggested that the Empire was misunderstanding the situation. Earth did not resist because humans believed they could defeat the Valkyrie military. They resisted because they saw no acceptable alternative. G1 explained human perspective. Her species had spent thousands of years fighting for survival on a single world. They had endured wars, plagues, famines, and natural disasters. They had learned that freedom was worth any price. When faced with the choice between subjugation and death, humans would choose death. But they would prefer a third option. They wanted to live free and coexist peacefully with other species. She made a proposal that shocked the council into silence. Instead of conquest, why not cooperation? Humanity possessed expertise in large-scale construction and long-term life support systems. These were technologies the Empire had abandoned centuries ago in favor of faster-than-light travel and military efficiency. Human engineers could teach Valkyrie builders techniques for constructing massive structures. In exchange, Earth wanted access to faster-than-light technology and energy shield systems. War Minister Borum objected immediately. She argued that giving advanced technology to a primitive species violated every principle of imperial policy. It would upset the established order. It would encourage other species to demand similar treatment. The Empire maintained control through technological superiority. Sharing that superiority was suicide. Emperor Changman raised his hand for silence. He asked Yuan a direct question. What guarantee could humanity offer that they would not use Valkyrie technology against the Empire? Once humans possessed faster-than-light travel, what would stop them from becoming a threat? Yuan's answer was simple and honest. Nothing would stop them except mutual benefit and respect. Trust had to begin somewhere. The council debated for hours. Conservative factions argued for total war. Progressive factions suggested negotiation. Economic advisors pointed out that conquering Earth would be expensive in both resources and lives. Military strategists warned that even victory might inspire resistance movements across the Empire. The humans had demonstrated that determination and unconventional thinking could overcome technological disadvantage. During a break in the proceedings, Intelligence Officer Minho presented additional information that changed the discussion. His team had discovered that humanity had already launched for generation. Ships beyond their solar system years before first contact. These ships carried over 3 million colonists toward nearby star systems. Even if Earth was destroyed, humanity would survive. Those colony ships would eventually reach their destinations. They would build new worlds. And they would remember that the Empire destroyed their homeworld. This revelation shifted the calculation. Destroying Earth would not eliminate humanity. It would create a vengeful diaspora scattered across multiple star systems. Each colony would possess the knowledge and techniques to build massive defensive structures. Instead of fighting one determined enemy at one location, the Empire would face multiple opponents spread across parsecs. It would be a nightmare scenario that could last for centuries. Emperor Chungman made his decision. He was old enough to remember when the Empire ruled through strength alone. But he was also wise enough to recognize when old methods no longer worked. Humanity represented something new. They had forced the Empire to adapt or face prolonged conflict. He would choose adaptation. He announced that the Empire would recognize humanity as an independent sovereign power. The Treaty of Seoul would establish Earth as the first non-vassal species within. Valkyrie controlled space in over 1,000 years. There would be trade agreements, technology exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. Humanity would not bow to the Empire, but they would not be enemies either. They would be something unprecedented. Equals, the decision sent shockwaves through the imperial court. Some members saw it as wise pragmatism. Others viewed it as the beginning of imperial decline. War Minister Borum resigned in protest. Several admirals requested transfer to border fleets, unwilling to accept peace with primitives. But others, particularly younger officers, like Jiwan and Minho, saw opportunity in the new relationship. News of the treaty spread across the empire within days. Vassal species learned that a primitive world had successfully negotiated for independence. Some celebrations erupted on subjugated worlds. Other vassal governments sent quiet inquiries to Earth asking how humanity had achieved what they could not. The Empire's 3,000 years of unchallenged dominance had encountered its first. Significant crack. Ambassador Giwan returned to Earth with the signed treaty. She had spent weeks in the imperial capital, negotiating details and building relationships with moderate Velkari officials. She brought not just a peace agreement, but also the beginning of cultural exchange. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had somehow become a catalyst for that change through nothing more than stubborn refusal to accept limitations. 2 years passed since the Treaty of Seoul was signed. The relationship between humanity and the Velkari Empire remained complicated but functional. Admiral Hyjin now commanded a joint defense initiative that patrolled the border between human space and imperial territory. Her second-in-command was Grand Admiral Sun Wu, the same Velkari officer who had once bombarded Ganymede. They worked together with professional respect, though trust came slowly. The first major joint project was Unity Station. The massive shipyard combined human engineering with Velkari technology. It orbited a neutral star system halfway between Earth and the Imperial core worlds. Human construction workers taught Velkari engineers how to build at scales the Empire had forgotten. They showed them how to create structures that could support entire cities in space. The Velkari, in turn, shared their knowledge of faster-than-light engines and energy shield technology. Lieutenant Commander Yuna worked as a human liaison aboard Unity Station. She was young, barely 30 years old, but she had studied Velkari language and culture since first contact. Her assignment was to facilitate cooperation between human and Velkari work crews. It was challenging work. The two species approached problems differently. Humans favored bold, massive solutions. Velkari preferred elegant efficiency. Both sides had to learn to appreciate the other's methods. Yuna became friends with Daeon, the Velkari sensor specialist, who had first detected the human generation ships. Daeon had requested transfer to Unity Station specifically to work with humans. She was fascinated by their unconventional thinking. The two young officers often shared meals together, discussing their respective cultures and trying to understand each other's worldviews. Their friendship became a symbol of the new relationship between their peoples. Construction on Unity Station progressed faster than anyone expected. Within 18 months, the facility was operational. It had dry docks large enough to service generation ships. It had manufacturing facilities that could produce both human and Velkari components. It had living quarters for 10,000 workers from both species. Trade ships began arriving regularly, carrying goods and materials from across human space and the Empire. The economic benefits surprised both sides. Human agricultural products were popular in the Empire. Humans had developed efficient vertical farming for their generation ships. These techniques produced high-quality food in limited space. Velkari luxury goods found eager markets on Earth. Their advanced manufacturing created products humans had only dreamed about. Trade volume increased monthly as both economies discovered mutual benefits. Not everyone was happy with the new arrangement. On Earth, some politicians argued that humanity was becoming too dependent on Velkari technology. They feared that the Empire might cut off trade and leave Earth vulnerable. In the Empire, conservative factions continued to view humans as dangerous primitives who would eventually threaten Velkari's supremacy. Both sides had extremists who wanted to return to conflict. The biggest challenge came from other species within the Empire. Delegations from 12 vassal worlds arrived at Unity Station within the first year. They all had the same question for Ambassador Jiwan. How did humanity achieve independence? What was their secret? Could other species follow the same path? Juan found herself in a delicate position. She wanted to support freedom for all species. She also needed to maintain her relationship with the Empire. She met with each delegation privately. She explained that humanity had no magic formula for success. They had simply been fortunate and stubborn. They had built massive structures out of necessity, which accidentally provided military advantages. They had been willing to sacrifice everything for freedom. Most importantly, they had convinced the Empire that conquest would be too expensive. Each species would need to find their own path based on their unique circumstances. Some vassal species took this advice to heart. 3 worlds petitioned the Empire for greater autonomy. They did not demand independence like Earth, but they asked for more control over their own affairs. Emperor Changmin, seeing the winds of change, granted limited self-governance to these worlds. It was a small step, but it represented a shift in imperial policy. The absolute authority the Empire had maintained for 3,000 years was beginning to erode. Meanwhile, Earth's military capabilities continued to evolve. With access to Valkyrie technology, human engineers began designing their first true warships. These vessels combined human-scale construction with alien weapons and propulsion systems. The first ship, named Indomitable Hope, measured 23 kilometers in length. It was larger than any vessel in the Valkyrie fleet. When completed, it would be the most powerful warship ever built. Admiral Hai-Jin oversaw its construction personally. She understood the delicate balance humanity needed to maintain. The ship had to be powerful enough to deter aggression, but not so threatening that it provoked the Empire. It needed to demonstrate human capability without appearing hostile. Every design decision was scrutinized by both human and Valkyrie officials to ensure it would not destabilize the fragile peace. The ship's maiden voyage was scheduled for the treaty's 2nd anniversary. Representatives from Earth and the Empire would attend the ceremony. It would be a demonstration that humanity had become a true spacefaring civilization. But as construction neared completion, intelligence reports brought disturbing news. A pirate fleet had been attacking merchant vessels near Unity Station. The pirates were using old Imperial military equipment, probably stolen or purchased from corrupt officials. Admiral Hai-Jin proposed that Indomitable Hope's first mission should be hunting these pirates. It would serve multiple purposes. It would protect the trade routes that both species depended on. It would demonstrate human military capability in a non-threatening context. Most importantly, it would show that humanity used its power responsibly. Grand Admiral Sunwoo agreed to provide intelligence support and tactical coordination. The joint operation was remarkably successful. Indomitable Hope, accompanied by 6 Valkyrie cruisers, located the pirate base within 2 weeks. The pirates had hidden themselves in an asteroid field, believing no large vessels could navigate the dense debris. They had not anticipated a ship designed by humans who regularly mined asteroid belts. Indomitable Hope moved through the field with ease, its massive hull absorbing minor impacts that would have damaged smaller vessels. The pirates surrendered without a fight when they saw the combined human and Valkyrie fleet. They had expected to face merchant ships and patrol vessels, not a massive warship supported by Imperial cruisers. Admiral Hai-Jin ordered them detained and turned over to Imperial authorities for trial. The operation had been a complete success, and more importantly, it demonstrated that humans and Valkyrie could work together effectively. News of the victory spread quickly. On Earth, people celebrated their military's first successful operation alongside alien allies. In the Empire, public opinion toward humans shifted slightly. They were no longer seen as just stubborn primitives. They were capable partners who honored their agreements. The relationship still had its tensions, but it was becoming more stable. As the 2nd anniversary of the treaty approached, Lieutenant Commander Yuna stood on an observation deck aboard Unity Station. She watched human and Valkyrie workers collaborating on a new construction project. They were building a scientific research vessel that would explore uncharted regions of the galaxy. It would have a mixed crew from both species. The mission would take years, but both sides were committed to the endeavor. Yuna thought about how much had changed in such a short time. 2 years ago, humanity and the Valkyrie Empire had been on the brink of war. Today, They were partners building something neither could create alone. The galaxy was vast, and both species had much to learn. There would be more challenges ahead, more misunderstandings and conflicts to resolve. But for the first time in 3,000 years, the Empire was changing. And humanity, through nothing more than stubborn determination and unconventional thinking, had become a catalyst for that change. The future remained uncertain. Other species watched Earth's example closely. Some would follow humanity's path toward greater autonomy. Others would remain loyal to the Empire. The balance of power in the galaxy was shifting in ways no one could predict. But Una felt optimistic. She had seen what cooperation could achieve. She had witnessed friendship bridge the gap between species that should have been enemies. If humans and Velkari could work together, perhaps anything was possible. The stars held infinite possibilities, and for the first time in history, humanity would explore them as equals rather than subjects.